Hey, we're back with Grand Tactician Civil War CSA campaign, and I've done a few minor things off camera since the last episode. I have General Braxton Bragg was commanding the artillery in the Missouri Army up here, and I have brought him back down and created a new command, the Confederate States Army Headquarters. And the idea of this command is a couple of things. Number one, this is the capital, and it is a long way from any of the front lines. However, AI forces in this game have a way of kind of slipping around, sometimes undetected, past your armies and running around in the interior. A lot of times when they're doing that, they're raiding and not actually capturing things. But I just didn't really like the idea of some force that I hadn't really seen before coming from some unexpected direction and actually getting to and capturing Montgomery, which I have to think, you know, one of the standard strategic objectives for the game is to capture the enemy capital. And when of course, if you play as Union, that's almost always capturing Richmond, but in this case, it would be capturing Montgomery. I don't know if the AI is programmed to pursue those objectives explicitly. But if it is, there may be little armies trying to get to Montgomery, and I might miss one. So one job for this command is to just kind of sit around, and I'm going to build a few forts around Montgomery, just as kind of a tripwire, so that if they're headed this way, they have to hit a fort first, and then I'll have just a couple of. I'm not going to create like a whole army for it. That would be resource inefficient. But I'll have like a couple of brigades so that if that does occur, there is some force with a few soldiers to go join that siege and lengthen it long enough that a real army can march down and address the issue if needed. So that's one purpose of this command. And another purpose is kind of a recruiting center. Because if you and we saw this with our existing armies, if you recruit units, brigades and battalions into an existing army, until they get there, the readiness of that particular force is trashed. And so just because I recruit an additional brigade to fill out a force structure in one of these armies, I don't want them taking that readiness hit while waiting for that unit to show up. Now, sometimes those units show up quite quickly, but sometimes they take a while to get there, as we saw also in some of our forces. So the idea is recruiting new troops will be done here to this command, and then once they have arrived there and readiness is green, then they will transfer those forces to the field armies, which actually happens fairly quickly in this game. So those are the purposes for this Army HQ. It's an administrative command. And the reason I chose Bragg to head that up is that Bragg has got 3 stars in administration. So he'll get those troops up to readiness, full green readiness faster, and for whatever length of time any units sit in this command, they will also train faster. So that looked like a really good place to put Braxton Bragg, because he's really good at administration and he's not good at anything else. All right. And that's where he will stay for the remainder of the war. I also considered putting Samuel Cooper in charge of this, because Samuel Cooper is a full general. And he's actually not too bad. He's got a lot of fame, and he's got 2 stars in 3 of the, he's a 7-star guy. Pretty, here I go on one of my tangents, pretty enigmatic figure in the history of the Civil War. Samuel Cooper was actually the senior-most general in the Confederate States Army. He was senior to everybody else. Senior to Lee, senior to Albert Sidney Johnston and Joe Johnston. He was the ranking officer. And you just never, ever read about him. He doesn't come up. Who was this guy? It's hard to figure out what did he do? What was his role? What his position was is his title was the Adjutant General of the Confederate States Army. He stayed in Richmond for the entire war. But the degree to which, was he a glorified clerk? Was he like a Halleck? A Winfield? You just never hear about the guy. I mean, he had to be doing something, right? This is one officer that I know hardly anything about from everything I've read about this conflict, and I'd kind of like to know more. And I don't quite know where to go find that. The Wikipedia entry on him is pretty short. He was. I mean, kind of the picture that one might have is that, well, he was pretty old, too. He was in his 60s. That's why he didn't I think that's probably the reason he didn't have a field command and wasn't considered for one. Just too old. Like Winfield Scott on the Union side. But he was apparently pretty highly thought of. He holds the highest rank in the Confederate Army. I would just like to know more about him. The one thing that did kind of come out in the little blurb that I read on him in Wikipedia is that he was apparently pretty highly thought of. He didn't appear to have any enemies or critics. I guess if you're not doing anything, there's nothing to criticize. But one thing he did do that was mentioned is at the end of the war, he went out of his way to preserve the records that he had charge of, preserve the records of the Confederate Army, and make sure that those were properly archived. A lot of times when nations lose wars, this happened probably a really good example is Germany toward the end of at the end of the Second World War. There's a lot of records burning and destruction because I guess people think, well, we don't want the enemy to know this, even though the war is going to be over in a few days. We still, well, Cooper did the opposite thing. He wanted all that preserved for the United States records, and he got a lot of credit for that. And there's a massive, there's so many, there's so many, so much literature, historical literature, on this war, and it's been said it's definitely the most written about, studied, analyzed war in American history. I don't know if I've seen it claimed that it is the most studied, analyzed, written about, more books on the Civil War than any other war in history. I don't know if that's true. I would think World War II would give that claim a run for its money. But maybe just from an American perspective, that may be true. Like literature on World War II written about the American involvement in World War II by American authors. Okay, maybe the Civil War beats that out. But part of the reason for that is not just the interest in the topic, but also this may have been one of the most, particularly from a pre-20th century perspective, this may have been one of the most exhaustively documented wars in history. Just the sheer amount that was written during the war, records, official records, letters, diaries, journals. It's an immense amount of primary source material. And one of the biggest sources is the official, I forget the full exact title, but the official record of the United and Confederate States Army during the late conflict or something like that. The official record is shorthand, the OR is like one of the biggest primary sources, and it is enormous. It's like well over 100 volumes. The number that sticks in my head is 128 volumes. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but it's just an enormous compilation of records and from both sides. It was compiled after the war for both armies, both governments. And Cooper's efforts at the end of the war was like the biggest contribution to the Confederate side of that record. If for nothing else, just from a historical documentation, that was a pretty significant contribution that he made. But in talking about that documentation, we know so much about Lee's thoughts and his communications and his relationship with Jefferson Davis because Lee was in the field. He could not often talk to Davis. He had to send letters and telegrams. All of that was recorded, saved, preserved, documented. We can read that and tell what he was thinking. He had to write letters to his wife. We read all those. Same for all the other field commanders. Cooper, he's sitting in Richmond. When he talks to Davis face to face. So I have this lingering suspicion that we don't have the window on this guy the way we have on others because he didn't have to write everything that he talked about with the Confederate president or with the Confederate Secretary of War or the Confederate Secretary of the Navy. You get where I'm going here. His influence, his advice, his input into decision making in Richmond would not necessarily have been recorded and preserved in the way that the input, the communications, the thoughts of field commanders would have been. Anyway, I went off on a tangent there. I'm sorry about that. I feel like there's more to know about this guy. And I, for one, would like to. If anyone knows of a book or an article or a source online that kind of gets into some detail about this guy, I'd like to see that in the comments. I really would. And it may just be he was just kind of an airhead, and the only reason he was a general was because he had been a general in the. I think he had been a general in the United States Army, one of the very, very few. And then they just kind of, they just put him in a place where he couldn't do much damage. Maybe that's all there is to it. But I suspect not. That's just, from what very little information I do know, that's just not the feeling I get. I think there's just more to know about this guy. And I will now shut up about that. So, we have this Army HQ that's going to be in Montgomery. Recruiting troops, building some forts. And, yeah, so what I did... So the forces I have here, the manpower pool crept up a little bit, and when I first filled out the organization of some of our forces, I didn't quite go all the way to what I had laid out in my Army organization discussion a few episodes ago. Our manpower pool got to the point where I felt comfortable recruiting a few more full-size infantry brigades, so I have done that. And I had to find a home for John B. Gordon. So he's gonna have a brigade here pretty soon and get transferred to one of the main armies. He's one of my favorite Confederate generals. And the reason for that is, you have these kind of political generals on both sides during this conflict. And some of them had prior military experience, a lot of them did not. Most of them were not very impressive. But there were a few who were actually pretty good and performed pretty admirably from a military perspective throughout the war. And John Gordon was one of those. And he did not have any prior military experience at all. He was not a West Pointer. He had never served, he had not served as a volunteer in the Mexican War or any of the various, anti-Native American conflicts. But the term would be Indian Wars. In today's day and age, I don't even know if that's, I don't know, maybe that's an offensive term now. But he didn't have any kind of background like that at all. And he's listed in the game as a, quote, political general, which I guess he was. I mean, he was an upper class dude. I don't, as far as his background pre-war, I know he was mainly into mining. He was involved in mining right around in the right around in this area, kind of where Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama all meet at this border corner near the Tennessee River, kind of close to Chattanooga, just right in this area. Like, what is this little town? Bridgeport, like right in here, such that I think he lived in one state, worked in another, had mines in all three, sort of thing, and they're all within easy, a reasonable distance, just right in this area. And he himself was a Georgian, but I think he initially helped organize a Alabama regiment, and was just initially one of the officers in that regiment. So he's classified as a political general, but I think he was probably more of a volunteer type. I've never read that he was appointed to a high rank solely because of his social or political status. He seems to have come in at a pretty junior rank, like a captain or so, and rose pretty quickly, but primarily through battlefield merit. And he actually ended the war as a corps commander in 1865. Anyway, that military performance I always thought was pretty impressive given the lack of background. On the Union side, kind of a counterpart to that, I've always thought would be someone like David Birney. Kind of a similar situation. Also considered a political general in this game, but that's another guy that seems on the Army of the Potomac side to have risen largely through good performance on the battlefield. Anyway, enough of that. I had to find a place for John B. Gordon. Now, as far as after the war, yeah, he wrote a pretty good memoir that's worth reading, but he makes himself look good, like pretty much everybody did in their memoirs. He certainly wasn't alone in that regard. And he was also kind of a lost causer, kind of part of the crowd that put forward that lost cause narrative of how gallant the Confederates were against insurmountable odds and blah, 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 blah. Yeah. But, most of those guys were. But just for his military performance during the Civil War, pretty impressive guy. And that is a lot of extraneous historical chattering, and I've burned up a pretty good portion of this video length. Okay, enough about that HQ. We got our engineering corps over here building this telegraph line. He has built this line at Helena, and my original thought for routing this thing was to run it over to Little Rock, Fort Smith, Carrollton, and up this way. But as Price has advanced, I think I've got him going to Batesville, and from Batesville maybe Rockridge for sure would be in range. We'll have to check the radius. Maybe it'll reach as far as Fredericktown. You don't have to put him in a town. Maybe I could just put it here kind of where this road crosses this river, and it might reach directly to St. Louis. The most direct route would be telegraph station somewhere around these forts. Cairo, right up through here would be the most direct route. But of course, at the moment, the Union still owns Cairo. So that wouldn't work. And I think Price has got green readiness. In our last episode, we won the latest in our string of victories against the Union forces in Missouri. The Army of the Mississippi has retreated up here north of the Missouri River. And I think Price can just bang right on into St. Louis. It's got an open road. And I want to make sure I beat the Army of the Mississippi there. I am going to no, I had thought about force marching them, but nah. I do want him scouting, though. That's going to take a while. That order's going to take a while to get there too. All through the Union campaign that I did, if anyone currently watching this watched that also, I kept running into situations where a battle would happen, and I knew that there would be several corps. Later in the war, when the armies are bigger and there's multiple corps, and a battle would occur, and I knew there would be multiple corps involved, and I would try to get my corps close to where I knew the battle would be before initiating that battle. And the enemy corps would be in the area some distance away, and then we'd get into the battle, and I'd see these really short reinforcement times, or instant reinforcement times for enemy corps, whereas it took, mine would be over 24 hours away, and sometimes 36 hours away, even though they looked close on the map. And I was wondering why that was happening. I thought maybe it was tied to the initiatives of the corps commanders, or maybe the initiative of the army commander. Turns out the default stance that I like for my armies is scouting, because that improves intelligence and it builds XP toward opening perk slots. And of the 3 available options, there's guard, scout, and raid. And 9 times out of 10, I don't like using raid. Definitely not in my own territory, and not in any territory that I care about the support of the local population. And so out of of the other 2, scout just seemed more useful to me than guard. So I always have my armies on scout. What I didn't know is that scout, because the idea of scouting is that you're kind of spread out and looking, and so the army is, as it's moving, more dispersed, and that affects reinforcement times. So I kind of need to rethink how I use that. I'm still going to use scout a lot. However, when I'm concentrating for a battle, or I'm in a situation where I need to make sure this corps can reinforce if a battle occurs, I need to be more judicious in using that stance. As it is right now, there is no reinforcement situation here. Price is on his own, so there's no reason for him not to scout. As far as our other armies, just about done with our forts at Nashville. I think we completed the fort in a previous episode at Charleston. This fort is done here in Northern Virginia. This fort is done, and now Johnson is almost done with the other fort at Winchester. Army of Northeastern Virginia is back up to 30,000. Department of Pennsylvania is still sitting at 13,000. And we don't know where McClellan is. He's got 24,000. What's the update on? Yeah, he's still somewhere in this Grafton area, not doing much. But if he were to come east toward Winchester, Johnston has now got a force that I think can deal with that just fine. And if he comes south toward Charleston, Garnett's still, he's got all of his forces recruited. He'll get another brigade once it's ready down at Montgomery. But a lot of these brigades are still pretty small. 1,300, 1,400 under McLaws. I could actually just, well, I can't combine them, but, well, I could, because they're both Virginia troops. Yeah, I won't do it just yet, but once those other brigades are ready, I'll send 2 brigades up here. And then I'll combine McLaws and Tolliver's divisions, brigades. This is kind of spelled. If you said this phonetically, you'd probably say somebody would probably say Taliaferro. That's the way I read it for some time, but this was pronounced Tolliver, and that's a pretty old Virginia family at the time. I don't know if it still is. I think we're at October. We don't have much campaigning time left. I think I would like to punch McDowell out of Virginia and see if we can pick up Alexandria before everybody goes into winter quarters. 30,000, 27, almost 28,000. I don't think Beauregard needs Johnson's support to do that. So let's go ahead and march on McDowell. Now he might get reinforced by Patterson up here. I think that's Patterson. I mean, their commanders could have changed, but those are the commanders that these two probably started with. So we'll get over in Missouri. We've got Price moving up to St. Louis, and let's get Beauregard moving on the Army of Northeastern Virginia. And see if we can pick up Alexandria here at the tail end of 1861. Let's get time rolling. Really nothing to report on the naval side of things. I've gone over that a couple times recently. No change. Oh, there is one other thing that I wanted to talk about, and this is kind of a little game glitch I wasn't aware of that folks might be good to know. Let's go back to the Army HQ. I recruited a bunch of horse artillery for all the various units, and we've seen them in action in Missouri. And just so let's look at that Missouri Army just real quick. And these horse artillery units, if you recruit a full-size horse artillery unit, it should be 100 men, 104 to be exact, and 7 guns. And so the horse artillery units that I actually have in the armies are about half that. Around 50 men and 4 guns or 3 guns, right? And so I thought, did I make a mistake and inadvertently recruit small size horse artillery? I didn't think that I had. But I did. But it was not a player error. Let's just go to the HQ command here, and let me show you what happened there. So if you, and I'll just recruit a couple to show what I'm talking about. So add new unit manually. It's just a few guys. I can, here, Alabama's fine. So the small size is 52, the medium size is 78, and the full size is 104. And I hit recruit. Well, that's not what I meant to do. Stark. And it is in fact 104 and 7 guns. However, if I recruit using this little quick recruit tool down here, here's horse artillery, 3 pips for full size. That's small, medium, and full. If I recruit this way, actually put a 1 in there, it comes not even at small size. 45 men, 3 guns. I had recruited all of those horse artillery using this tool, and that's why they came small. And I don't know why. So that's something to watch out for. That doesn't occur with infantry, cavalry, and regular artillery battalions. You get the full size if you use this tool. With horse artillery, at least for me in this campaign, you don't get full size. You don't even get the full small size. So I thought that was worth pointing out. Be wary of that for those of you actually playing the game in your own campaigns. I don't actually want these. Or do I? I want the full-size one, because I think I need to go and replace all my darn horse artillery in every force. You know, I was a little underwhelmed at how small they were, and I was thinking maybe horse artillery was a bad idea. Well, when they're half strength, yeah, it is. They're already small. So I need to go back and fix all my horse artillery across all the forces, which will definitely be an off-camera thing. Okay. Beauregard's going to go hit, just to have a battle somewhere other than Missouri. And once this battle gets initiated, I'll, because I've been jibber-jabbering about history stuff, kind of a low-content episode, I'm afraid, as far as action on the map, I'll probably forward it on to the next episode for the Battle of Battle of Alexandria, I'm sure it will be. I wonder what map it's going to give us. Probably the Manassas map, I would guess. These forts done at Nashville? They are. Off camera, I'll plop some more commands into those things. And here we go. Let's see. He is getting reinforced by the Department of Pennsylvania. So significantly more men than we've got. 35,000 infantry, 7,000 cavalry, 85 guns, compared to our 23,000 infantry. 4,000 cav. And oh, by the way, these are newly recruited cav. The North Virginia Army did not originally have cavalry, so those are newly recruited. It'll be their first combat, and they don't have I didn't have good guns for them. They don't have mixed cav weapons, but they've only got Springfield musketoons. That's all they got. They are commanded by Jeb Stuart, though. and 59 guns. I'll go ahead and start the battle. We'll see what kind of map we've got. But I'm actually going to play it out in the next episode. But a big chunk of that advantage is coming from Patterson's command. He may be a ways out for reinforcement. So it could be pretty even right now. It is the Manassas map. It's put us in an attacking situation. And the objectives are way over on the other side of the map, right in his spawn area, which means there's no way we're going to be able to race to an objective. And because just because the Union owns an objective does not necessarily mean that the Army is already there ready to defend. Like, if there was an objective, say in the middle of the map, and it would be within his deployment zone, but that doesn't necessarily mean he spawns the army there. He might still spawn his army at his entry road. Now, a player would simply move the army and set up a defense around the objective. I don't know if the AI does that. They may just kind of start where they start, like this, where we are. But regardless, yeah, there will be a defense here. And he's not going to be interested in moving to attack us. So we're going to have to do the thing where we kind of ease up to the objectives and try to precipitate an attack by him simply by getting close to them, and then their individual units start coming out of their defenses to attack us. It's kind of the way that I handle that, as has been seen in battles prior to this, like the last battle. So it's going to be one of those kind of affairs. Let's take a look at the terrain around these objectives. Okay. I don't think I want to approach from the north because we've got Bull Run, which I don't think is crossable except at fords and bridges. So that would be kind of problematic coming down from this way. I think we're just going to have to march our way kind of here to the south. If I can get the army kind of in this area, and I think we've got room to do what we want to do. There's some high ground here, which ought to offer some pretty good artillery. Positions. And this is the one army I have that actually has better than 6-pounder guns. I think I've got a 10-pounder Parrott and a 12-pounder Napoleon in this artillery division. As far as a route to get to that area without engaging, yeah, we'll just come here into New Market and then take this road toward the objectives. That's the initial plan, assuming his army is here on the objectives. And we'll get Stewart's Cav kind of, he may set up in this area along the river. So we'll get Stewart to scout out ahead and see what's up. With the initial march plan will be to come down to this area and come at the objectives from the south. That's a better bet. But in any case, I'll put the cut in here for the end of the episode. And the next episode, and I'm going to do all the marching and scouting. I'm going to do that bit off camera. And we'll start the next episode with our army kind of in position. And Federals sighted and ready to begin combat operations. Before I do that, let's just look at where are the Federal entry points. There's one right here by the objectives. There's another one up here at Centerville. And there's one way up in the corner. I don't see any up. Okay. So I don't... Oh. And there's also one down here to the south. Interesting. That would be problematic. For this plan, I would not want Patterson showing up in my rear. So one of the things... I think I may march everybody down this road and capture this point before Patterson can arrive on the field, and then march up through here. That's a short little... It's kind of weird that there's no connection here, but that's a real short little march across here to the other road. That'll be fine. I wonder if the order of battle tells, I don't think, 11 hours. Yeah, I think we can get down there and capture that road before Patterson is due to arrive on the field. So that'll be part of the plan, and I think that will force him to come in up here and not be in a flanking position. Okay. And the battle will be the next episode. Thank you very much for watching and for putting up with all my jibber jabber about Samuel Cooper and stuff like that. See you for the battle in the next episode.